visitors were, yeah. Very good.
Keep it on top.
And, oh, it's great. Isn't it where they have a new lot
No, they
really
really.
called,
More so.
what's that called?
Like,
Milky
go
White or
farmer.
something.
I mean, I love
Very
it right
proud.
here.
So I asked my grandson,
Yeah,
are you familiar with
he's known as for
no, and he's all talking about it.
Or don't go out. You don't go on the balcony, Jerry.
Oh, yeah. All it is it's the way you pour the milk. The white on white.
You go out and look at it, see? I do that.
All it, yeah.
So far, so good. Yeah.
Nicholas is no big deal.
We're just saying what goes on.
Why
Oh,
don't you
hey,
eat?
deal out of it.
I think I'll have some dinner.
Oh,
Maybe enjoy a few.
your wife's gone, isn't she?
Maybe she'll bring me something back. You never know. I could get lucky. I could get lucky.
Yes, you might get lucky. Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Still green.
He is, but it's slow recovery. He's very weak and grounded. I've been talking to Rebecca and stuff.
Where you going?
Yeah. Not that I heard.
Oh, good. Okay.
Well, we got our profile is out there. So we're
Been married for
accepting
53 years.
indications of interest, and then we'll do the interviewing all through the late spring.
Bill and I work together.
They can do that too, and then just apply directly, and then
Direct side of the house.
they'll vet them and visit, and
Italian bar.
hopefully we'll get 3 or 4 good candidates. They don't get the numbers 3 or 4, but they don't get
It's a
that
pretty
number
safe
3 or
way.
4
I don't get,
candidates to vote on.
he doesn't look at me cross out or anything.
We just don't have to vote on one or 2.
Oh,
Oh, look at you.
Make that disappear. But yeah, they would be elected in November and then probably installed. Bill, you got a mark here from about.
big exciting. It's kind of exciting for this committee.
I got the
Go, don't they go and visit? But they do that.
Or vice versa.
They do that, or
Yeah,
bishops have to come here.
I think we bring them here. Sniff around.
I'd be interested, one time you really will be, maybe I'd be interested in being.
My daughters really enjoy that. Whenever they come over, it's like.
Sure, it's easy, but I guess there's only like 3 or 4 other openings right now.
Oh,
So it's not like we have a whole scad of competition.
that's fine. What?
Isn't that a fun?
I never knew how to do that.
Yeah.
As I recall,
Not little, I know. Sounds like she.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversations, but I'm told it's go time here. So, brief introduction. I'm Bruce Bauer. I'm a deacon, ordained a deacon, and formerly assigned at St. Andrews here in town, so I know most of you. So we're here tonight as kind of a kickoff for an ongoing conversation about the Eucharist and what we do and why we do what we do. And I will tell you that in coming weeks you'll hear plenty of theology and history, and tonight you won't. I'm here to talk more, thankfully, about the practical aspects of what you see when you come to church and you see us hovering over the altar and making the magic happen. So, you know, typically when Episcopalians go to public worship on a Sunday, they go to a service of communion, or what we call Holy Eucharist. And that's really goes way back to the earliest church. The ancient church is how they worshipped. When Jesus instituted the Eucharist at the Last Supper, he gave the direction that his followers were to do likewise, to carry on that act. So, and for us, it's kind of like the clearest, strongest way for us to remember Jesus' death and resurrection, and how we stayed bonded with our Savior, with Jesus, and with each other. So, you know, we use the term kind of interchangeably. We hear about communion and Eucharist, right? And some denominations will lean one way or the other. I think probably in a Roman Catholic and the Episcopal Anglican traditions, you're going to hear more about the Eucharist, and maybe in more other Protestant denominations, it's communion, if they do it at all. I grew up in a congregational church in Michigan, a little village, and we had communion maybe twice a year with the little tiny cups already in your pews, you know, of grape juice, and didn't know much about it beyond that, even why we did that. But no bread, no, just the wine. I will tell you that the word communion is a Latin word. It comes from the word communionum, and it's the root word for a lot of our common language, like common and community and communion. And really, what it means is it means together, and that we participate in something that's common to all, right? So that's what communion really is to imply. Now, Eucharist comes from a Greek word, Eucharista, or Eucharistia, I think it is, Eucharistia, which means what? Thanksgiving, exactly right. So when we come to a service of Holy Eucharist, it's to give thanksgiving for all around us. Now, well, I had a thought, and I'll get back to it. I will tell you that we're talking about this now because we are in Lent, right? And as we're approaching Holy Week, and one of my favorite services of the year occurs during Holy Week, and that's Maundy Thursday, right? And most of us remember that service as being the one where we have the foot washing. But it's also is at the Last Supper where the practice of communion or the Eucharist came into being, where Jesus, and it's mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where they broke the bread and to remember this is my body, and had the wine and so on, and to urge, in Luke at least, to urge all of us to continue in that process. You know, I don't know how many of you have ever been a Eucharistic minister or an altar guild, but you get a very different view of the service when you're seeing it from the sanctuary. Or our choir that operates out of the chancel there. They're close enough to really see what happens, where the magic happens. And if you ever get a chance, I encourage you to try to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what goes on actually before and during service at the altar. And I will tell you that there's a lot of gear involved. And before you even put your fannies in a pew, I will tell you that the altar guild and the deacon have been busy preparing for the service. And when you come into church and sit in your pew and center yourself and what have you, you can look at the altar and you won't see much. It's a bare altar by and large, except for a couple candles. And the altar, through most times of the year, is covered with a beautiful white linen cloth called a fair linen. It's bare and clean, and all the attendant gear that you see up on the table here is back behind the altar, on shelves on both sides, if you look closely, and little tables down below, but they're back of the altar to the right and left. Those are what we call the credence. Credence is the tables that we see back there. And I'm going to stop here with a thought. You know, our friend Father Jerry Kolb, I remember, gave a sermon several years ago in which he made the point that he was always pretty good with languages, you know, like we learn in school, the Spanish and the French or whatever. And he said that the most difficult language he learned was when he went to seminary and he had to learn the names of all this stuff. Because, and I'll go with you as we do this, but in fact, I'll start as we go. One of the first things you'll see as you look up on the credence table is this. We call it the stack or the vested chalice, okay? And on the very top of that, you'll see this happen as during the offertory that the deacon is kind of busy setting the table up here. The first thing I do is go to that credence table and I put this stack on the altar. and I begin to put things together. Now this on top has a purpose, and it's got a name. It's called a burse, a B-U-R-S-E. Inside of, and what a burse is, it's kind of like a wallet. It's kind of a hard cardboard filling with fabric cover, and inside it is a piece of cloth, but it has a name, of course, and that is called the corporal. And the corporal, it's part of our language lesson here tonight, the corporal is a piece of fine white linen that you see me kind of fly out and place in the center of the altar. And it's on the corporal where all the kind of sacred items wind up. Everything that's kind of holy or to be consecrated winds up on the corporal. It's the landing pad for all things of consequence as we prepare for communion. You'll note during the process when we process in, we've got our acolytes and flags and whistles and candles and banners and what have you, and the cross, and that typically we'll have Eucharistic ministers process in carrying these two items, or one of them at least. What would you call these? Vessels? No, they're cruets. In Anglican, these are our cruets. And they'll be bringing in the wine and sometimes the bread as well. Now, in some churches or some denominations, really churches across our diocese, sometimes you'll see the elements process in. Sometimes you'll see that the elements are already on the credence table before the service, and sometimes you'll see laity bring forth the elements at the end of the offertory, to bring them forth to be placed on the table. But they bring in their cruets. One is water, one is wine, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. But, sure. Okay, the question is why would one church do it one way or the other? Process it in or have it already stationed or bring it up by laity during the service? And that's just a matter of their own parochial experience and tradition. There's not a right way. There's not a particularly wrong way. I think we do it at St. Andrew's this way because it's expedient. And it's because the way we know what we do it. And the moment you do something other than that, people notice, then they'll ask questions. So now that we do it this way, we're going to continue it this way. Okay? By the way, question is it function of the time of the year or a certain season or the church calendar? And the answer is no. It's not really. It's whatever. Some of these priests went to seminary A, some went to seminary B. One's more conservative, one's more liberal. It's whatever they grew up with and learned and feel most comfortable with. You'll notice, by the way, that as I kind of break out some of these items, that these are very bright, shiny, polished silver. That's typically what we see during the year. Right now, what you'll see during the Lenten season would be what? Everything's toned down, right? We're in a somber season. So we use pewter ware and wooden crosses and wooden book stands and the big silver gospel book, that heavy gospel book that your deacon processes in, that's been retired right now. It comes in just a red book, kind of a somber, stripped-down version of it all. Anyway, back to where we were. We have our vested chalice, and I've already removed the what? The burse, inside of which was the, come on, there will be quizzes as we go here. So, inside of which is the corporal, which is the landing pad where all things will fall. So now, I'll tell you that this item, this cloth that covers the stack, has a name. And I doubt that many of you know what that is, and it's called a pokrovet. A pokrovet. P-O-K-R-O-V-E-T. This is the pokrovet, and your challenge is to find a way to use the word pokrovet in a sentence twice before you go to bed tonight. So, good luck with that. I think it's Polish. I'm not sure what that. I don't think it's Latin. Anyway, so we remove the pokrovet. Underneath, we find this item. This is called a pall. P-A-L-L, a pall. And do we know that this has a purpose? It has a purpose in the church. In the ancient church, we use it to cover the chalice during the Eucharistic prayer to keep bat turds out of the wine. old, open, airy churches in the ancient lands, and some parts of Missouri, West Missouri Diocese too, no doubt, have problems with critters, whether it be birds or bats. This is used. We don't use that because, thankfully, we have a bat problem currently at St. Andrews. So we retire the pall, where we find next the chalice. Well, this is a chalice, right? It's not a cup. More English, more church language. This is a chalice, not a cup. Some of them are bright, shiny, polished silver. Others right now, like we use, are going to be pewter. And on top of the chalice was another white linen cloth that has a name. It's called a purificator. Purificator, to make something pure. And you'll see that used during the service. We remove it at this point and put our chalice on the corporal. You'll see during the service, if you come to the rail for communion, you'll be offered the cup, right, as part of your communion process. And the Eucharistic minister or the clergy will offer you the cup, and if you sip from it, you'll find that as you complete, they will give it a good wipe. Jerry's done this. And you'll see before they go to the next person, they also give it a quarter turn, so we don't freak out or think we're getting everybody's germs in the process, okay? But that's what the purificator is for, to wipe things down as necessary. And that gets placed right here. So we looked at the burst, the corporal, the chalice, the pall, the purificator, and then we have this, not a plate, but a paten. Okay, this is the paten. And this is what we'll have our bread stationed on or brought in if the back to your point, if the Eucharistic ministers bring forth the wine and the bread, they'll have some bread here, and it'll be covered at that time. But the paten goes on the corporal, and there'll be bread on the paten that is at this point unconsecrated. This is just bread, right? And you might be curious to know, how do we know how much bread to use, right? Exactly, an altar guild lady comes up and tells me, well, you guys are all listening to announcements. I don't have to listen to the announcements. I get to be busy over here trying to set things up. During the service, and typically during the sermon, you'll see the ushers kind of inconspicuously walk up the aisle like this. What they're doing is counting you to see who's here tonight or today and how many of there are you. And they make a little list. Now, we have to have the list of attendance at our services for church records and for the bishop and to sign off on when she comes and makes her visitation. And it's also for your deacon or your clergy up there, because they know that every one of those little round breads that we have is good for about 20 bites. Okay, so we'd have to do some quick math. And if they say that there's 220 people here, we're going to put out 11 loaves of bread here to be consecrated. And that bread is kept over here in the credence. Remember those shelves that we talked about? The altar guild prepares the loose loaves in a plastic bag, which does not have a church name, but they're in the plastic bag, and we count those out and put them on the paten, and off we go. Ziploc may be Latin. I'll have to do a little study there. At St. Andrews, we do use little loaves of bread that are baked weekly. We have a ministry at St. Andrews called the Bread Ministry, which is probably, 5 or 6 people who rotate and will prepare bread to make sure we have enough for events coming up, be it church or funerals or what have you, to keep a fresh supply of bread coming up. Other churches in the Anglican and Episcopal Church, some of them use hosts, the little flour and water hosts that you would liken back to Roman Catholics in particular. They will use those. No comments there. It's a matter of history and tradition and what do we use. We use kind of all three. We keep in our aumbry both what an aumbry is, Well, an aumbrey, Jerry, is a is a receptacle, a cabinet, in which we keep both bread, already consecrated bread and wine. It's locked up, and you'll often see a candle nearby. There's an aumbrey, if you look closely, in the chapel at St. Andrew's. You'll see that there and there's another one in the altar guild sacristy. But we keep consecrated items in there for people to use to go out and deliver communion or Eucharist to the homebound or what have you. Okay. So let's catch up here. We got the paten. You'll see once the corporal has been set and the vested chalice has been revealed, everything's setting down, the bread is here in front of us. The next thing is you'll see one of the acolytes hand me one of these cruets from the credence table, and hopefully it's the one with the wine in it. And what we'll do, all the time, yes, plenty of mistakes along the way. You'll see. Oh, yeah, but they know it's. Yeah. So the wine gets poured in here. This is all unconsecrated at this point. See, I use my little purificator to keep drips, and it also looks fancy to you folks out there. So we do the wine, and I'll give this back to our acolyte, and then they offer me the other cruet that has water in it. And this is not holy water, this is tap water. And you'll see me just put a splash of water in there. Now, well, I could use as much as I like, I suppose, but let me ask you the question. Why do we put water in with the wine, do you think? Hmm? There's that say that Jesus, the blood or the water that came from him when he was pierced and so on. Could be all kinds of theological reasons. I think the real reason is to dilute it so people wouldn't get drunk. Seriously. Way back when. And I don't know who would want to get drunk on our communion wine. It's a tawny port that you can't sell to most humans, I think.
I will say someone sitting in here with a real name, unnamed, that grew up in Southern Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Started coming to this little church, and within one or two times of coming to this little church that we first started dating, asked the minister what was in the wine because it was really good.
Really?
He's been coming ever since.
Well, this person needs. Yeah. You need to get out more, is my message to you. To have a little Jesus. We do dilute it with water, and again, there's a tradition involved there, and for appearance sake. But it was, I think, practically speaking, to dilute it. Maybe to make it last longer, but B, certainly to reduce its effects. Okay. Now, when you see me, Jerry.
I have to say to you that as a priest that goes around and supplies at different churches, not all churches have good wine.
They buy it on sale, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you have to finish that cup a lot of times, and so it really is struggle.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Now, when I'm done putting a little bit of water in with the wine, you'll see me turn back to the acolyte, who will be standing there with this, not a cereal bowl. This is called, anybody? A lavabo. Church language, lavabo. And they'll have a little lavabo towel over their arm like this, and the bowl in their hand, or not like that. And they'll take the wine to the celebrant, who will hang his pinkies over this, and they'll pour some water on it to cleanse his hands, or her hands, and use the towel as necessary, and then off that goes. So the lavabo and the lavabo towel find their way back to the credence. Ma'am? Yes. Pour wine over your hands. So that's why I mentioned early on how about when you're up front and you get to experience the holiness of preparing for a Eucharistic ceremony. Lots of funny things do happen up there, and it kind of loosens everybody up and gets us ready. Sometimes mistakes happen.
But you can imagine a 15-year-old acting like they're mortified.
Sure. Yeah, which is all good. inside scoop. Really? Keep it coming, yeah. Now, the last thing, and I don't have one here tonight, but the last thing you'll see the deacon or whoever's preparing the altar put on the table is a book stand, typically bright, shiny metal, but in this season, a wooden one. Again, right, we're in Lent, and with a book on it. And that book is called the Missal. And it's inside the Missal where there are all the different Eucharistic prayers, and there are many. If you're an 8 o'clock worshiper, we do Rite 1, which is kind of old King James kind of language, and it's very these and thous and penitential and what have you. And then at the 10:15, it's a lighter service where we use more common language. But even then, there are several Eucharistic prayers, prayer A and B and C and D. You'll see it noticed in your, or listed in your bulletin. And Gene, and again, there's no rule about this. It's the priest's call, typically, as to which Eucharistic prayer is used for the service. Some, I believe, like say prayer A is maybe more penitential, so we're using that now during Lent. Some of them are a little less so, and they can kind of come and go as you please. Something else I didn't mention earlier was the colors of the vestments of the burse and the pokrovit. I've used green here tonight. No reason, but we do have seasons in the church. You alluded to that, and right now in the Lenten season, the color you've noticed is purple, right? So we have purple vestments for all of our gear at the Eucharistic table. Green is what we call ordinary season, which kind of goes on through spring and summer. White at Easter, right? And at weddings and celebration events like that. We have a set of vestments there for our stoles and for the table that are red and yellow for when the Chiefs are doing really great or in the Super Bowl. Light blue we use during Advent, also during royal season when that matters. So where we get special approval really from the bishop to alter the colors. Anyway, so this is not our colors tonight. These are not our loot. We talked too about the chalice. There's as we approach Maundy, Thursday, we remember the Last Supper. Remember there's that famous painting by Michelangelo, The Last Supper, and everybody's at the table, all 13 people, Jesus and the 12 apostles. You'll notice, if you look closely, that there's no chalice on the table. And we think, well, why is that? That was the Last Supper, and this is where the whole institution of the Eucharist came about. Well, it's because the moment that painting is to reveal is when Jesus made the revelation to those around him that he was going to be betrayed. It wasn't about the Eucharist. It was about the betrayal. So don't look too close. But if you did, if there had been a chalice, it wouldn't have looked like this, I don't think. The likelihood is that the chalice, or the Holy Grail that we talk about, was probably a clay receptacle, for the day. It was common, as that meal was to be a common meal. So we don't mean to blow Indiana Jones and the search for the last crusade or whatever that was out of the water, but likely this is the Holy Grail was a clay item. So, okay, one other thing that you'll see on the table, typically this is held in the credence, but is brought out at the end of the Eucharistic prayer, is another small paten, right? Paten, another small paten, but also a slotted spoon. A slotted spoon. So don't eat your cereal with this. But you'll see that put on the corner of the altar. And what this is for is for the reason or the instance where, and when you're having communion at the rail, it happens that the chalice and the wine in it gets a little sloppy sometimes. There'll be crumbs from bread. Sometimes people will actually go to intinct their bread and drop the whole thing in that. Happens all the time. But it looks a little nasty after a while. And there was a fellow I went to seminary with who was a little, he had a weird sense of humor. Anyway, he called that when the bread and the wine got mixed, it was getting a little, He called that a Jesus smoothie. So, so we don't want that. So what'll happen is we'll scoop out the bread, put it on the table, right? And off we go. One other item you'll see up here, and then we can kind of move along. Another covered container is called a ciborium. And in the ciborium is where we keep pre-consecrated items. This one happened to have pre-consecrated gluten-free wafers in it. And we'll turn to that as needed. If we don't have enough bread that has been consecrated during the service, we may go to the credence table and get one of the ciboriums that'll have pre-consecrated bread or gluten-free items in there too. How many of those do we have stored away? Oh, I'd say 50, just in case. Yes, sometimes we do. Yeah, sometimes you'll see even more gear on the table. And if our supply of pre-consecrated items for home communion or whatever is running low, the Altar Guild will put out ciboriums that I would place on the table. In addition to today's bread and today's wine, maybe also a large flagon filled up with wine with the top open so they can bless that as they're blessing the wine and so on. Okay, good questions. A great big old flagon. No. One thing that happens, so we talked about the missal, and we have a particular Eucharistic prayer that's going on today, and you'll see the deacon step aside and be prepared to flip pages and point also. Here's a little item that I use for when Jerry is celebrating or whatever. You can pass it around if you like. It's called a yad, Y-A-D, yad. Now that's Hebrew. I got this in Jerusalem when we took our trip to the Holy Land a few years ago. This is what's used in Judaism, where they, and in the synagogues, where they point to keep their hands off the Torah or off the missal so it doesn't get hand oils and the like on it. So we point very specifically as that goes around. Beg your pardon? A yad, Y-A-D, which is Hebrew for hand. I'd actually I travel with the bishop around the diocese, and I take that with me every time, yeah. Because it's kind of cool, yeah. I look very important when I hold my yad. Now, so those are generally the items that you'll see brought forth and presented on the table. The Eucharistic prayer happens, and then we come forth and you're offered your bread and wine. So, what happens at the end of the service? Because, try as we might, we may have poured too much wine or too much bread, or it didn't get consumed or whatever. Well, it all comes back and it's kind of consolidated. So if there's four patens out being served, we'll try to put all the bread onto one and all the wine into one cup. Some churches you'll see where they'll actually consume that. You've been in churches where that's happened, which I guess is one of the cool parts of being clergy, is where you get to drink all the wine that's left over, or eat all the bread. Some churches do that, and then they rebuild the stack. At St. Andrew's, we just clear everything, and we don't consume that. But what consecrated items are left over, what happens to that is it's returned to nature, is the proper phrase. So the bread and the wafers that have been consecrated but not consumed, they are put out in the gardens for animals to consume. The wine, if you ever look closely, peek into the Altar Guild sacristy, there's a little structure on the wall, a stone structure I think it is, almost looks like a fountain, but basically it's a drain. And that's called a piscina, which is just a open little drain that goes right into the earth, not into the plumbing system, but right into the earth where the consecrated wine is taken and gone away. So, how are we doing so far? Okay. Okay, there will be a quiz at the end when we speak about, again, the Pokrovit. See, I've done it twice myself already. So we're Pokrovit and all of our gear. So the other thing I want to talk to you tonight was about the deacon's role in all this. I mentioned early on that I'm ordained as a deacon in the Episcopal Church. In fact, I'm the archdeacon in the Diocese of West Missouri. And that's That's an appointed position. The bishop appointed me the archdeacon, I think 9 years ago now, a little over 9 years, which is just much more power. Yes, much more power. And in fact, when they paid me more too. They quadrupled my salary, because 4 times 0 is still 0. Typically, the deacon's role in the church, there are typically, the word, here's another church word, non-stipendiary. It means you're not getting paid for this. So it's a very pure ministry in that we are not compensated. But the archdeacon's role is to kind of watch over and develop and support and mentor all the other deacons in the diocese, and also to promote the diaconate that we'll talk about here in a minute, and raise up new deacons in the church. In the Episcopal Church, there are really 4 orders of ministry, four levels of ordination. And the first, if you look in your catechist in the Book of Common Prayer, the first that's named is the laity, because we're all ordained by virtue of our baptism, okay, to carry out the will of God as noted in the Gospels. So there's the laity, there's the bishop, the top dog, priests, and deacons. And they are separate but equal ministries. I will make the point tonight that someone who's a deacon is not someone who couldn't cut it as a priest. Okay? It's not that we did poorly at seminary. It's that we had a very specific calling. And the calling was not that we felt the need to consecrate items, because deacons don't do that. A deacon's calling is very specific. In fact, it goes back to the very, very early church. After Christ died, we read in the book of Acts, there came a time when the church was beginning to take traction, and the apostles got overwhelmed. They had all these demands on their time and things to do to support people in need and to do the things that Jesus had commanded them to do. And there was a time when, if you read, I think it's in Acts chapter 6, that there's a group of Gentile widows in Jerusalem that weren't being served. They were hungry, they were poor, they were in need. The apostles couldn't handle it, so they appointed 7 men at the time, to go out and serve them and to lead people into serving them. So 7 people were identified to be servants to those folks, and that was the beginning of the mission of deacons. It all kind of boils back to more Greek words for you to practice with, and one is diakonia. It's a Greek verb. It refers to service as a permanent activity of the church throughout its history. Diakonia, it goes from, I think it meant servant, basically like table servant. And if you think about it, that's what I've been doing up here. That's what you see on Sunday. Your deacon in church is, I think, conspicuous in what he or she does during the service. First of all, you see a deacon is dressed a little bit differently, right? We wear a stole, but we wear it over our shoulder and to the side. And the historical implication of that is, where priest stoles are and bishops are straight down. The deacon stole is to the side, as though it's been swept away so we can go to work. Exactly right. So we look a little different in that capacity. Our role is severalfold. One, see the deacon come in with the gospel book, and then steps out into the crowd and proclaims the gospel. We don't read the gospel, we proclaim the gospel. And our job there is to do just that. Our job of a deacon is to proclaim the gospel to the people and to live out the gospel as well. You'll see us do service work at the table. Again, back to that Greek word diakonia. It means servant or service at the table. Supporting the priest or the celebrant by pointing and so on, and clearing the table when it's over. And then the coolest part, I think, of the deacon's role is to give the dismissal at the end of the service. The implication being that worship on Sunday is fine, but it's not over when the music stops. And our charge is to help you move out into the world and to live out the gospel, loving and serving our neighbors, right? So that dismissal is a charge to get out there and get it done until we see you again. I would tell you that probably in a perfect world, the work at the Sunday service is maybe a third of what a deacon's job is. They're to be there and live in that iconic role, to appear to be service and proclaiming the gospel and to sending the people out and so on. But most of their work for Deacon Adam and others like him is to be out in the world. And when we see, somebody's likened deacons to like a hunting dog, a pointer. Because when we see a need in the world, someone's hungry, there's an injustice happening over here, our job is to point at it and show it to all of you and say, look at this. This is wrong. There's a need here. Let's go and get it done. My job isn't to go do it all by myself. My job is to have a prophetic voice and to lead others into service, to live out the gospel as we've all been charged. So that's where most of a deacon's time is spent, is in the world. And I will tell you that how a deacon winds up at St. Andrew's or any other church is they're assigned by the bishop and the archdeacon as to where deacons are going to be, where the need is most and where the fit is greatest. That's where they'll be. We have about 45 deacons in the Diocese of West Missouri. Only 12 of them are parochially assigned. Most of the rest are retired. We age out. So part of my work when I travel with the bishop, I'll be in Bolivar, Missouri this Sunday at St. Albans, worshiping with her and celebrating, is to go out and let people see a real live deacon and to tell a little bit about what I'm telling you and to maybe generate some interest for people that maybe feel a call to do more than they are. And to be called into service and to lead others, to be a leader of those into service. So that's part of what's going on with the deacons. The biblical role, it's the role of the deacon has changed over time. They were early on, before there were even priests. There were bishops and deacons, and priests came after. Okay, there have been times where deacons were not considered clergy, but they weren't considered laity either. They were just kind of a special, weird subset of folks over there that had a very specific job to do. There have been times like back in the Middle Ages where deacons were kind of done away with in the church. Then there was kind of came back in the 1800s and so on, where they became known as clergy and were ordained as such, as a separate but equal order. And even then, there was a time when the women couldn't be deacons. And it wasn't until I think in the 1970s, perhaps, when that changed. The Book of Common Prayer, the 1979, our new Book of Common Prayer, the 1979 edition that they talk about, it was from that time where the deacon's role was really built up and turned into what it is today. But it has gone through different periods of growth, waning and growing over time. But we are who we are today, and we have a very specific purpose. So leading and serving others outside the church is the big part of what we do. This is fun to do. It's important to do. It's great to be up there as part of the actual Eucharistic prayer. But as we all know, there's more to church than church, right? If you want to work out your spirit, you have to exercise more than one day a week, right? So it's coming to church and then going out and living into it. So I will field questions if anybody has some. Otherwise, I'm getting steamed. Question? What's the state in the Diocese of West Missouri? What does it take to be a deacon here? Well, there's a lot of discernment, just like with anybody going into ministry. And so the discernment at the church, your congregational level, and then also at the diocesan level. If you are past all that, and it's about a year process, I think, now to go through that in discernment and talking with others and going to, actually we have you go to a different church than your own for about 6 months to see how you fare there and how people recognize you. But once that happens, then you're a postulant, which is one of the coolest titles I think there is, being a postulant in the church. It means that you're a seminarian, basically. And here in the Diocese of West Missouri, we're fortunate, we have a regional seminary in Topeka called Bishop Kemper School for Ministry, where they have a program for the diaconate. It's a 2 years of study, tests on history and theology and ethics and pastoral issues and work and lots of papers. It's not an accredited school, so you're not going to walk out of there with a Master's of Divinity piece of paper, but you walk out of it with that kind of an education for sure. So 2 years of seminary work, and also a unit of clinical pastoral education, which is Father Jerry's backbone. You know, he brought the whole concept of CPE, clinical pastoral education, to the St. Luke's hospital here in town, and that's where a lot of us are able to do that work, to learn how to be a chaplain, how to be pastoral. So to earn a unit of that, which is either in a very intense 11-week everyday process, or over about a 9 or 10 month period where they do it once a week over that time, once or twice. And then finally, you take an ordination exam. If you ever talk to the clergy, there's what we call the general ordination exam, or we also have one through Bishop Kemper, an ordination exam, which is a series of, I think, 6 essays on different subjects. So it'd be history and theology and pastoral and ethics and worship and what have you, all down the line. They'll come up with a very pithy question and turn you loose with limited resources, and then write a paper about it, and it gets graded by a group called the Board of Examining Chaplains, which is priests and clergy and laity as well, some college professors. I'm on the Board of Examining Chaplains now. I got on the other side of the table. Again, more power. So to see if they've learned what they need to know, basically, as they go into ministry. All that behind them, there's a period of internship where you go and serve as a deacon or train under a deacon at one of our area churches, and then you become, God willing, ordained. So it's a long process. And it can be a little intimidating when you hear it fed to you through a fire hose like that, but it's a very solid, wonderful, uplifting, horrible, but satisfying end result to become ordained as a deacon or as a priest. And by the way, you know, all of our priests at St. Andrew's, Mother Rita, Mother Jean, Father John, they were all deacons too. Because the way it happens in the church is you are first ordained. If you are to be ordained, you'll be first ordained as a deacon. You're what's called a transitional deacon, which means that's not your final stop. But they have to spend at least 6 to 12 months as a transitional deacon, kind of doing the work of a deacon, setting the table and leading into service and speaking from the pulpit with a prophetic voice, getting a sense for what the diaconate really is. And then to the extent they survive that, then they may be further ordained to, well, you know what it is? How do you find your prophetic voice? You know, I didn't preach a lot, but when I did, if you find it always came back to, if you listened at all, about do something about it, right? Here's what Jesus said. Here's what we can take about it. Here's what's going on in the world today. Now, why don't we do something about it? That's what prophetic voice is, that there's injustices here or there's a need here. And here's ways and avenues that we can take to address that. Now I have to follow through, make sure it's prophetic instead of just baloney. Anyway, so priests are transitional deacons, that they transition then to the priesthood. But we're all called to do different things. What a deacon can't do that a priest can is several things. We call them the ABCs. A, we don't absolve. I can listen to your reconciliation or your, but I can't absolve you of your sins. Okay, a priest can do that, or a bishop can do that. B, blessing. I don't bless people in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. I can bless us, but I can't bless you specifically. That somehow is set aside. So, you know, I can do weddings, but I can't bless the couple at the end. It's a priest's job to do that. And then C, absolve, bless, consecrate. It's not our job to consecrate the elements. Our job is to set the table and help serve. So deacons are not sacramentalists, is the point. But neither do we want to be, because we have other things to do, things that need to happen in the church. So we all work together. It's one big happy family. We couldn't do without either of us, any of us, right? We work together, and we all have our own lane to be in and to stay in. Okay, any questions beyond that?
The way that
Good question. So the Church of England, the Anglican Church, are they structured the same way? And the answer is, I think so. Jerry, you might have a different answer on that, but I don't think there's many differences. You know, the reason we became the Episcopal Church and left the Church of England was because of the Revolutionary War. It wasn't very popular church to be the Church of England. So we said, okay, well then we'll just call us this and do about the same thing, but just with a different name. And they speak funny over there, exactly right. Uh-huh, 91st and Knoll.
They have this very small, and I think they have one service on Sundays at 8 a.m. or something. I've always wanted to go and just see the reason, but
Some of them have kind of, there's a history there. Some of them have spun off from the U.S. Church, and they answer to African bishops. And a lot of that had to do with the Episcopal Church welcoming homosexuals and alternative lifestyles and what have you, and the Anglican Church would have none of that. So that's where that split happened. But basically, you'll see the same activity.
and there's the African Methodist Episcopal, the AME Church.
AME, African Methodist Episcopal.
Is that another branch of what you're talking about, or?
No. Right. Mm-hmm.
They started the African Methodist Episcopal,
Right.
for a while it was called the African Church.
Yep.
So it never has been a part of the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, only in name. Episcopal means it's bishop driven. Episcopacy is a bishop driven.
Nothing in their service that seems to
No, not really. Not really.
I grew up in the Lutheran Church in Durham.
Mhm.
When I came over here, I was fighting because they wouldn't accept me.
The Lutheran Church wouldn't accept you?
No, they wouldn't accept me here, the Episcopalian Church, because I was Lutheran.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I was working all the time, 8 years,
Really?
because I was a little
Yeah, I mean, times keep changing, you know, and we try to be now today, Gene, if you had to put a name to it, we are a church, our doors are open, all means all and all that business, and it's a true statement in today's world. It's much easier to move from, I don't know, you know, every now and then you'll see somebody raise their hand or make the point known over a cookie in the jewel room, say that they are Episcopal or cradle Episcopalians. I mean, they've been Episcopalian since the day they were born. More of us came from elsewhere, you know, from the Roman Catholic Church. Maybe they felt there was too much dogma or doctrine, too strict, maybe too conservative. They found their way here because it's still a similar liturgy. Others from different Protestant church feel a need to have a more full service and be more open to people. So we come from all different places, including Lutherans. Now we have a very good relationship with the ELCA. Is that right? Episcopal ELCA? Yeah. Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. So who knows? I mean, that's always changing, relationships. So
Brenda said, some of us come because we were married.
there's that too. Some people have marry into the Episcopal Church. All right, let's call it a night then. Thank you for your